In the dusty archives of West Virginia's State Hospital, there exists a file that has been sealed for over 150 years. Inside are medical records, police reports, and testimonies that document the most cursed family line in American history. The Fairmont family bloodline produced 7 generations of twins, and with each pair came madness, murder, and mysteries that defied explanation. What you're about to hear are true accounts of a family that seemed destined for darkness from the moment they set foot on American soil. This is not a story of coincidence or bad luck. This is the chronicle of a genetic curse that manifested itself in ways that challenged everything doctors, lawmen, and clergy thought they understood about human nature. Between 1844 and 1871, the Fairmont name became synonymous with terror across 3 states, and by the end of their reign, entire towns would cross themselves at the mere mention of their bloodline. The story begins in the winter of 1844, when Ezekiel Fairmont and his pregnant wife Sarah arrived in the coal mining town of Morgantown, West Virginia. They had fled from Salem, Massachusetts, carrying nothing but a wooden chest and terrible secrets. Sarah was 9 months pregnant and already showing signs of what the town doctor would later describe as a peculiar affliction of the mind. Ezekiel claimed they were descendants of accused witches from the Salem trials, forced to change their name and flee west to escape persecution. But the townspeople of Morgantown would soon discover that whatever darkness the Fairmonts carried with them was far more dangerous than superstition. On February 14, 1844, during the worst blizzard in West Virginia history, Sarah gave birth to twins. The midwife who attended the birth, Martha Henley, would later testify that she had never witnessed anything like it. The first twin, whom they named Abel, was born completely normal, but the second twin, Cain, emerged with eyes that were completely black, no iris or pupil visible, just solid darkness. More disturbing was the behavior of the newborns. Abel would cry when Cain was content, and Cain would fall silent the moment Abel made a sound. They seemed to exist in perfect, unnatural opposition to each other. Martha Henley noted in her journal that whenever she held one twin, the other would stop breathing until his brother was returned to the crib. Ezekiel was a man haunted by his own past, but he recognized something familiar in his sons. In hushed conversations with his wife, he spoke of the bloodline curse that had followed his family for generations. Sarah, whose mental state deteriorated rapidly after the birth, began claiming that she could hear the twins communicating with each other without making any sound. As Abel and Cain grew, their strange connection became more pronounced and more disturbing. At age 3, Abel spoke his first word, brother. At the exact same moment, Cain spoke his first word, death. The local pastor, Reverend Thomas Whitmore, documented this incident and noted that the twins seemed to share thoughts and sensations in ways that defied natural law. By age 5, the twins had developed what their father called the knowing. Abel could predict when someone in town would fall ill, always exactly 24 hours before symptoms appeared. Cain, meanwhile, seemed to know when someone would die, often describing their final moments in disturbing detail days before the event occurred. The town's doctor, James Morrison, became fascinated with the twins and began documenting their abilities. His medical notes, preserved in the West Virginia Historical Society, describe experiments where he would show one twin a series of cards while the other was in a separate room. The second twin could identify every card with perfect accuracy, despite having no visual contact with his brother. But the twins' supernatural connection came with a price that became more apparent as they reached adolescence. Abel began experiencing violent seizures whenever someone died in the town, writhing in apparent agony as if he was experiencing their death himself. Cain, conversely, would become catatonic during these episodes, staring into space with his black eyes while his brother suffered. The first murder associated with the Fairmont bloodline occurred on October 31, 1859, when the twins were 15 years old. Margaret Shelton, a young woman who had been courting Abel, was found dead in the woods behind the Fairmont house. Her body showed no signs of violence, but her face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. The local sheriff, William Hartley, noted that her eyes had turned completely white, as if all pigment had drained from them. Abel claimed to have no memory of the previous evening, but witnesses reported seeing him and Margaret walking toward the woods together. Kane, when questioned, simply stated, "She saw what she shouldn't have seen, so now she sees nothing at all." The cryptic response disturbed investigators, but without evidence of foul play, no charges were filed. 3 weeks later, Thomas Brennan, a local blacksmith who had publicly accused the twins of witchcraft, was found dead in his shop. His body was discovered standing upright at his anvil, hammer in hand, but his heart had simply stopped. The town doctor could find no medical explanation for his death. Kane was seen near the blacksmith shop that morning, but when confronted, he told Sheriff Hartley, "Some hearts are too weak to bear the weight of truth." The pattern continued throughout the winter of 1859. Anyone who openly challenged or threatened the twins would meet an inexplicable death within days. The victims showed no signs of violence, but all died with expressions of overwhelming terror. The townspeople began to whisper about curses and supernatural retribution. Sarah Fairmont's mental condition worsened as her son's abilities grew stronger. She began claiming that she could hear voices from the other side calling to her children. In her final diary entries, discovered after her death, she wrote, "The twins are not my children anymore. They belong to something older, something that has been waiting generations to claim them. Ezekiel knows what we have brought into this world, but he is too afraid to stop it." In March 1860, Sarah was found dead in her bedroom, apparently having died in her sleep. However, the autopsy revealed something disturbing. Her brain showed signs of severe trauma, as if she had experienced extreme psychological terror. Dr. Morrison noted that her final expression was identical to those of the other mysterious deaths in town. Ezekiel, now alone with his increasingly dangerous sons, made a decision that would doom future generations. Instead of seeking help or leaving town, he chose to embrace what he saw as his family's destiny. He began teaching the twins about their heritage, sharing stories of ancestors who had possessed similar abilities and the power that came with accepting their dark gifts. Under their father's guidance, Abel and Cain learned to control and focus their abilities. Abel discovered that he could induce illness in others by concentrating on their suffering. Cain found that he could cause death simply by willing it, though the effort left him physically drained for days afterward. The twins' reputation spread beyond Morgantown, and they began attracting visitors from across the region. Some came seeking their help in predicting deaths or illnesses in their families. Others came offering money for the twins to use their abilities against enemies or rivals. Ezekiel, recognizing an opportunity, began charging for his son's services. By 1861, the Fairmont house had become a destination for desperate people seeking supernatural intervention. The twins, now 17, had grown into their powers and their father's ambitions. Abel had developed the ability to cause specific illnesses, from simple fevers to wasting diseases that would slowly consume their victims. Cain could kill with increasing precision, targeting specific individuals even from great distances. Their most notorious case involved the Hensley family from neighboring Clarksburg. Jacob Hensley had refused to pay a debt to Ezekiel and publicly called the twins frauds and devil worshippers. Within a week, Jacob's entire family began falling ill with a mysterious wasting disease. His wife died first, followed by his 3 children, and finally, Jacob himself. All died within a month, their bodies showing signs of extreme malnutrition despite having access to food. Dr. Morrison, who examined the Hensley family, noted that their condition was unlike any disease he had ever encountered. The victims seemed to be consuming themselves from the inside, as if their bodies were rejecting all nourishment. Most disturbing was that all 5 family members died at exactly the same time on different days, their deaths spaced precisely 24 hours apart. Word of the Hensley deaths reached the state authorities, and an investigation was launched into the Fairmont family. Federal marshals arrived in Morgantown in August 1861, but their investigation was complicated by the outbreak of the Civil War. Many of the potential witnesses had joined military units or fled the region, and local records were scattered or destroyed in the chaos of wartime. The war years marked the peak of the twins' power and influence. With traditional authority structures disrupted, they operated with near impunity across West Virginia and parts of Pennsylvania. They hired themselves out to both Union and Confederate sympathizers, using their abilities to eliminate enemies and protect allies. Confederate Colonel Marcus Reed hired the twins in 1862 to eliminate a Union spy network operating in Charleston, West Virginia. Within 2 weeks, 7 suspected Union agents had died under mysterious circumstances. Each death appeared natural, but all occurred within hours of the twins visiting the areas where the agents were hiding. Union Captain David Walsh, hearing reports of the twins' activities, hired them in 1863 to protect a supply convoy from Confederate raiders. According to military records, no Confederate forces attacked the convoy, but several raiders were found dead along the planned route, apparently having died of sudden heart failure while preparing their ambush. The twins' wartime activities brought them to the attention of military physicians and government officials interested in their abilities. Dr. Benjamin Hammond, a Union Army surgeon, conducted a series of tests on the twins in late 1863. His classified report, only declassified in 1963, described abilities that he termed psychosomatic influence at distance. Dr. Hammond's experiments confirmed that the twins could induce physical symptoms in test subjects located miles away. More disturbing was his discovery that their abilities seemed to be growing stronger with use. In his final report, he recommended that the twins be kept under constant military supervision, warning that their powers could potentially affect large groups of people simultaneously. However, the military's interest in the twins was cut short by a tragedy that demonstrated the true extent of their dangerous abilities. In January 1864, during a demonstration for military officials, something went wrong with one of the twins' exhibitions. Kane was attempting to demonstrate his death-inducing ability on a condemned prisoner when he lost control of his power. Instead of affecting only the intended target, Kane's ability spread to everyone within a half-mile radius of the demonstration site. 18 military personnel, including Dr. Hammond, died instantly of sudden cardiac arrest. The condemned prisoner survived, but every other person in the area died within minutes. Abel, sensing his brother's loss of control, suffered the most severe seizure of his life. Witnesses reported that he screamed for nearly an hour, experiencing the death agonies of all 18 victims simultaneously. When the seizure ended, Abel had aged noticeably, his hair having turned completely gray and his face bearing the deep lines of premature aging. The military incident forced the twins and their father to flee West Virginia. They traveled west, eventually settling in a remote area of Colorado Territory, where they hoped to escape both military pursuit and the growing attention of government investigators. In Colorado, the Fairmonts attempted to live quietly, but their reputation had preceded them. Local Native American tribes, particularly the Ute, recognized the twins as what they called soul eaters, and warned their people to avoid the area where the family had settled. The twins, now in their 20s, began experiencing new manifestations of their abilities. Abel developed the power to heal as well as harm, but healing others caused him intense physical pain. Kane discovered that he could animate the recently dead, though only for brief periods and at great personal cost. Their father, Ezekiel, now in his 60s, began showing signs of the same mental deterioration that had affected his wife. He became obsessed with documenting the family's supernatural history and predicting the abilities that future generations might possess. His journals from this period, discovered decades later, reveal his belief that the twins represented only the beginning of his bloodline's dark evolution. In 1865, Abel fell in love with a local woman named Catherine Mills, the daughter of a prosperous rancher. Catherine was aware of the rumors surrounding the Fairmont family, but was drawn to Abel's gentler nature and his apparent desire to use his abilities for healing rather than harm. Their courtship was complicated by Abel's connection to his twin. Whenever Abel experienced romantic feelings for Catherine, Cain would suffer physical pain. Conversely, when Cain felt jealous or angry about his brother's relationship, Abel would experience overwhelming sensations of dread and despair. Catherine, unaware of the supernatural dynamics affecting her relationship with Abel, became increasingly concerned about his erratic behavior and sudden mood changes. She began keeping a diary documenting these episodes, creating an unintentional record of how the twins' psychic connection affected their interactions with others. The relationship reached a crisis point in September 1865 when Catherine witnessed one of Abel's healing sessions. A local child had been brought to Abel suffering from a severe fever, and Catherine watched as Abel placed his hands on the child and absorbed the illness into himself. The child recovered instantly, but Abel collapsed and spent 3 days suffering from the fever he had taken on. Catherine's diary entry from that day reveals her growing understanding of Abel's true nature. What I witnessed today defies all natural law. Abel took the sickness from little Mary into his own body, as if illness was a physical thing that could be transferred, but the cost to him was terrible. He aged years in those 3 days, and I could see in his eyes that he was experiencing not just the fever, but every moment of suffering that child would have endured. Despite her fear, Catherine remained committed to Abel, believing that love could help him overcome his family's curse. She convinced him to marry her in October 1865, in a small ceremony attended only by her family and a few local friends. Cain served as his brother's best man, but witnesses noted that he seemed to be in physical pain throughout the entire ceremony. The marriage initially brought Abel a measure of happiness and stability. Catherine's influence helped him focus his abilities on healing rather than harming, and for several months the couple lived quietly on Catherine's family ranch. However, this period of peace was short-lived. In March 1866, Catherine announced that she was pregnant with twins. The news affected both Abel and Cain in unexpected ways. Abel was overcome with joy, but also terror, fearing that his children would inherit the family curse. Cain, meanwhile, began experiencing phantom pregnancy symptoms, suffering from morning sickness, food cravings, and mood swings that mirrored Catherine's condition. Ezekiel, learning of the pregnancy, became obsessed with the idea that his grandchildren would represent the next evolution of the family's supernatural abilities. He began preparing elaborate rituals and ceremonies that he believed would enhance the twins' powers from birth. Catherine, disturbed by her father-in-law's increasingly erratic behavior, convinced Abel to move away from the family property. The couple relocated to a small cabin several miles from the main Fairmont homestead, hoping to raise their children away from Ezekiel's influence. However, Abel's connection to his twin brother meant that distance provided no real escape from the family's supernatural dynamics. As Catherine's pregnancy progressed, Abel's abilities began changing in unexpected ways. He found that he could sense the developing twins in the womb and began experiencing visions of their future. What he saw filled him with dread. His children would possess abilities that far exceeded his and Cain's, but they would also be driven by an insatiable hunger for supernatural power. In her final diary entries, Catherine wrote about increasingly disturbing dreams and sensations. She claimed that she could feel the twins communicating with each other inside her womb, and that sometimes she could hear their thoughts. Most frightening was her growing certainty that the children were aware of the supernatural legacy they were inheriting. Catherine gave birth on November 1st, 1866, during a violent thunderstorm that locals later claimed was unlike any natural weather they had experienced. The first twin, a boy they named Ezra, was born with the same black eyes that had marked Cain from birth. The second twin, a girl named Elizabeth, had eyes that constantly changed color, cycling through blue, green, brown, and gray in a matter of seconds. The births took an immediate toll on Catherine, who began aging rapidly in the days following delivery. Abel, desperate to help his wife, attempted to use his healing abilities, but found that whatever was affecting Catherine was beyond his power to cure. Dr. Marcus Webb, who attended the birth, noted that Catherine seemed to be suffering from supernatural exhaustion, as if the act of giving birth to the twins had drained her life force. Within a week of the twins' birth, their supernatural abilities began manifesting. Ezra could cause small objects to move without touching them, while Elizabeth seemed to be able to read the thoughts of anyone who came near her crib. Most disturbing was their apparent ability to influence each other's powers, creating effects that were greater than the sum of their individual abilities. Catherine died on November 15, 1866, exactly 2 weeks after giving birth. Her final words, according to Abel's journal, were a warning about the children's future. They are not like you and Cain. They are something new, something that will make your generation's powers seem gentle by comparison. You must find a way to break the cycle, Abel, or they will destroy everything they touch. Abel, devastated by his wife's death and terrified of his children's growing abilities, made the decision that would define the final chapter of the Fairmont legacy. He took Ezra and Elizabeth and returned to his father's homestead, believing that Ezekiel and Cain might have knowledge that could help control or limit the children's powers. However, Ezekiel saw the new twins as the fulfillment of his lifelong obsession with the family's supernatural destiny. Instead of helping Abel control the children's abilities, he began training them from infancy, teaching them to embrace and enhance their powers. Cain, meanwhile, formed an immediate and disturbing connection with the children, serving as a conduit that amplified their abilities. By age 2, Ezra and Elizabeth had developed a form of telepathic communication that was far more advanced than anything their father and uncle had achieved. They could share not only thoughts, but also memories, experiences, and even physical sensations. Dr. Webb, who continued to study the family, noted that the children seemed to exist as two parts of a single consciousness. More frightening was their ability to influence the minds of others. Elizabeth could implant thoughts and memories in adults, making them believe they had experienced events that never occurred. Ezra could control people's actions directly, forcing them to act against their will for brief periods. The children's powers grew exponentially as they developed, and by age 3, they had surpassed their father and uncle in both ability and control. They could kill with a thought, heal with a touch, and manipulate reality in ways that defied all understanding of natural law. Abel, watching his children become something inhuman under his father's guidance, began planning a desperate solution. He had come to believe that the only way to end the family curse was to eliminate the entire bloodline, including himself and his children. In secret, he began preparing for what he saw as necessary sacrifice. On December 21st, 1869, the winter solstice, Abel put his plan into action. Using his ability to absorb illness and death, he attempted to take on the supernatural curse that had plagued his family for generations, hoping to contain it within himself before ending his own life. The attempt failed catastrophically. Instead of absorbing the curse, Abel's action amplified it, spreading supernatural contamination throughout the region. Within hours, every living thing within a 5-mile radius of the Fairmont homestead began showing signs of supernatural influence. Animals began displaying human-like intelligence and behavior. Plants grew at accelerated rates, forming unnatural shapes and patterns. Most disturbing, the recently buried dead in the local cemetery rose from their graves, not as mindless zombies, but as confused spirits seeking to complete unfinished business from their lives. Cain, sensing his brother's catastrophic failure, attempted to contain the spreading supernatural contamination using his death-dealing abilities. The effort killed him instantly. his body simply crumbling to dust as he poured all of his life force into the attempt to stop the curse's spread. Ezekiel, realizing that his lifelong obsession had led to disaster, made a final, desperate decision. Using knowledge passed down from his ancestors, he performed a binding ritual that would contain the supernatural contamination, but at a terrible cost. The ritual required the sacrifice of the family's most powerful members, the twin children who had become the focal point of the curse. The details of what happened next are unclear, as no witnesses survived to give complete accounts. Local records show that on December 22, 1869, a massive fire consumed the Fairmont homestead and the surrounding area. When authorities arrived to investigate, they found no bodies, but the ground where the house had stood was permanently scarred, forming a perfect circle where nothing would ever grow again. Abel survived the conflagration, but was found 3 days later, wandering in the mountains in a state of complete mental breakdown. He had aged decades in the span of hours, his hair white and his body that of an elderly man, despite being only 25 years old. More disturbing, he had completely lost his supernatural abilities, as if they had been burned out of him. Abel spent his remaining years in the West Virginia State Hospital, where he lived until 1871. During his confinement, he spoke constantly about the night his family died, claiming that he could still hear his children calling to him from the place between life and death. His attending physicians noted that he seemed to age at an accelerated rate, as if his body was trying to catch up to the decades of life he had sacrificed in his attempt to end the family curse. In his final coherent statement, given to hospital chaplain Reverend Samuel Morrison, Abel provided the only detailed account of the Fairmont family's supernatural abilities and the events that led to their destruction. "We were never meant to exist," he said. "The power that ran in our blood was borrowed from somewhere else, somewhere dark. Every generation paid a price, but we thought we could control it, use it for our own purposes. We were wrong. In the end, it used us." Abel died on October 31, 1871, exactly 27 years after his mother's mysterious death. Hospital records show that he died peacefully in his sleep, but his final expression was one of relief, as if he had finally escaped something that had been pursuing him his entire life. The official records of the Fairmont family end with Abel's death, but local legends suggest that the family's supernatural influence did not entirely disappear. Over the following decades, the area around the former Fairmont homestead became known for unusual phenomena: strange lights in the sky, animals behaving in unnatural ways, and occasional reports of ghostly figures that resembled the dead twins. In 1923, a geological survey of the area revealed that the ground where the Fairmont house once stood contained unusual mineral deposits that defied scientific explanation. The minerals seemed to absorb and reflect light in patterns that hurt to look at directly, and soil samples showed traces of elements that didn't match any known periodic table. Modern paranormal investigators have visited the site numerous times, consistently reporting electronic equipment malfunctions, temperature fluctuations, and the sensation of being watched by unseen observers. Most disturbing are the recurring reports of visitors experiencing shared dreams and telepathic episodes for weeks after leaving the area. The West Virginia State Historical Society maintains the sealed file on the Fairmont family, but access is restricted to approved researchers with specific academic credentials. The few scholars who have been granted access report that the documentation is more extensive and more disturbing than public records suggest. Dr. Margaret Thornton, who studied the Fairmont case in the 1980s, concluded that the family represented an evolutionary anomaly that briefly appeared in the human gene pool before destroying itself through its own supernatural intensity. Her research suggested that the twins' abilities were the result of genetic mutations caused by unknown environmental factors, possibly related to the unusual mineral deposits found throughout West Virginia. However, Dr. Thornton's research was discontinued after she began experiencing the same telepathic episodes reported by other visitors to the former Fairmont homestead. Her final research notes, written shortly before her retirement, warned that studying the Fairmont family might trigger dormant supernatural abilities in researchers themselves. The Fairmont bloodline officially ended with Abel's death in 1871, but genealogical researchers have identified several families throughout West Virginia and Pennsylvania with possible connections to the Fairmont lineage. Most of these families show no signs of supernatural abilities, but a few have reported unusual phenomena, shared dreams between siblings, the ability to predict illnesses in family members, and occasional instances of telepathic communication. The small town of Morgantown still bears subtle reminders of the Fairmont family's presence. The cemetery where many of their victims were buried is avoided by locals, particularly during the winter months when unexplained lights are frequently reported among the headstones. The old church where Abel and Catherine were married was abandoned in 1920 after a series of disturbing incidents involving unexplained voices and apparitions. Most tellingly, no twins have been born in Morgantown since 1871. Medical records show that while twin pregnancies begin normally, they invariably result in the death of one fetus before birth, as if some lingering influence prevents multiple births from coming to term. The story of the Fairmont family serves as a dark reminder of the dangers that can emerge when supernatural abilities develop without moral guidance or ethical constraints. Each generation of twins pushed the boundaries of their powers further, ultimately reaching a level of supernatural influence that proved incompatible with human existence. Their legacy raises disturbing questions about the nature of consciousness, the limits of human evolution, and the price that must be paid for power that transcends natural law. The Fairmont twins demonstrated that supernatural abilities, rather than elevating humanity, can instead lead to its destruction when wielded without wisdom or restraint. Today, the Fairmont name has been largely forgotten by history, relegated to a footnote in West Virginia folklore. But their story continues to resonate with those who study the darker aspects of human potential, serving as both fascination and warning about the paths that evolution might take when guided by forces beyond our understanding. The most damned bloodline in America burned itself out in a single generation of supernatural excess, leaving behind only questions, legends, and a permanently scarred landscape where nothing grows. Their story reminds us that some powers are too dangerous to wield, some knowledge too perilous to pursue, and some evolutionary paths too dark to follow, no matter how tempting the promise of transcendent abilities might seem.